My name is Stuart Easton. I'm the CEO and one of the founders at TransparentChoice. And it's great to see so many people joining us, and people coming from all around the world. Austin, Texas, very welcome. And I've got with me today a couple of guests that I'm just really excited about. The topic is about governance, right? So what is this crazy governance stuff? And so the two speakers are Ross Garland and Amanda Oakenfull. Ross is an author. He's done work with the British government and helped craft various standards all around ideas and topics of governance. Amanda, I've known Amanda. We were just working it out, and we've known each other a few years, right? And Amanda is a passionate advocate for governance. And on the first ever, I was going to say webinar, it was actually a podcast that we did together. I said something like, we've got a theory over here that prioritization is at the heart of a lot of project failure. And Amanda Kate shot right back at me. She said, no, look, governance in general, it is the cause of all project failure, right? And so, at that point, I fell in love, and we've been governance buddies ever since. And so Amanda works at IBM, where she basically runs everything, and at least on the delivery side. No, she's going to correct me in a minute, but she's an incredibly accomplished major program, large program manager, portfolio manager, and her nickname is the Mechanic, because her speciality is sort of coming in and fixing things that are broken. And that's really where she's coming from with this comment about governance and why it's so important. So guys, is there anything that I've missed in the intro that you would like to share? And if not, we're gonna jump in and get started.
No, but I'm just looking at Katie. Hi, Katie. Is keen to look at implementing portfolio governance in a large organization. So I think this is going to get really exciting. Personal thoughts on that. Just kicking off is governance quite artisan. So there's not a one solution that will fit everybody. So I'm going to really love to unpack and hear from Katie's background if she's got chat actions. Brilliant.
Well, so I've got a few questions that I want to throw at you guys, but again, knowing the rest of the panel, I assume that we're not going to get through all the questions. We're going to go off down various little rabbit holes, and we're going to have some fun. So let's kick off with to start with, why should we care about governance, and what even is this crazy governance thing? And Ross, you've kind of literally written the book on this, so why do you kick off?
Yeah, sure. It's such a good question, actually, because interestingly, if you had a group of people in a room, which we more or less do, and asked them all to describe what project management was, you'd basically get the same answer from most people. Everyone knows what project management is. But if you ask them about project governance, that's one of the issues we face. Everyone comes up with a different view of what it actually looks like. So when I first started working in this area, which was, well, at least 15 years ago now, I arrived at what I considered to be a very simple approach to governance, which is that project governance, or P3 governance, is about the framework that enables efficient and effective decision-making on projects, programs, and portfolios. Mm-hmm. And when I say a framework, it's the framework's basically got three components. The first component is the structure that you put in place, the committees and so forth, how they relate to one another, what their terms of reference are. The second component is the people who populate those committees, what their accountabilities are, and importantly, how you choose them, how you get the right people in the right positions. And the third component, of course, is documentation, because if you put rubbish in, you get rubbish out. So what's the documentation they need to be able to make the right decisions in that framework? So that's how I look at it. It's just the framework for effective decision making.
And Amanda, why does that even matter? right? I mean, it all sounds, no offense, Ross, but it all sounds a little bit dry and boring, right?
Oh,
So why does it,
I'm
why does it
steady
matter?
on.
Yeah, come
I'm
on,
not even,
it's 10 o'clock at night here.
Yeah.
I'm not even going to argue. He's like complete agreement. I often see one thing I dislike a lot is, and I'll get to the white matters in a sec, is that you see governance equals project management. It's just humans, and I jump up and down. It is decision making. It is how you structure your decision making, the strength of that decision making. You see me just say to Ash in the chat. He's just I love it, Ash, thank you. He's saying it's one factor. What about planning? Well, how do you make the decisions in planning? Governance is how you make those decisions. Anyone who knows me sort of in the ANZ area, sorry, I'm a program recovery person at the heartbeat. So I come in and recover people's disasters from project management perspective. And the way you always recover is leadership first, governance, communications, including reporting. And after that, it's tools. And this is how I'm getting to why it's so important. Most people come in and look at tools. They think they can fix this one, the schedules, the logs. Oh, if we fix that, then we'll be able to fix the communications, the reporting, the way in which we engage. And they try to push it up, bottom up, and that's just not true. Logic is already saying that if you're trying to leverage tools, yet your information that's feeding those tools and the decisions feeding the information that's feeding those tools down this side is wrong. If you try to push it from the bottom up and you go tools to communications, well, those communications are instantly going to feed a governance system that you put in place with dirty data for dirty decisions, and then it becomes circular. Yeah. So and then we'll push up, and if you have, and look, we can't really, changing your leadership can be difficult, particularly if you're in a position of recovery, because sometimes I'll call it, sometimes the people are in the wrong place and the leadership. I was going to go back to our great topic of choice on times there, the Trump analogy. But sometimes people are just in the wrong roles, and sometimes you can't change that leadership. So that means we come back down to governance, and like Ross said, putting that framework around the decision-making process to give the guardrails and the bumpers by which to support those decisions, and then move from there. But you certainly, that's why it comes back to being important.
Yeah, and so one of the things that I find really interesting is if you look at so if anybody's here in the UK on in the UK, tomorrow's Project Challenge in London, the conference in London. Ross, are you going to be there? Am I going to see you there?
No, I'm not. I'm getting conferenced out at the moment, but I'm off to I'm off to Saudi.
I know that feeling.
June it is. Yeah.
Yeah, I know that feeling. So I'm talking tomorrow, and this is one of the slides. I'm just going to share one of the slides that that I'll be using tomorrow. Hopefully you can see this one. So this is kind of a chart. This is PMI, pulse of the profession every year, and everyone has a version of this chart, right? Yeah. And the important thing here is that, this top line is how many projects actually deliver the intended business result, because at the end of the day, that's actually what matters. That's all that matters. And it sort of floats around between sort of 60 and 70%, and it hasn't really moved, right? And this is why governance matters, actually, because if you imagine you got into your car in the morning and it only got you to work 70% of the time, you would do something about that. 70% isn't good enough. And the PMI did a little bit of research into sort of the top performing PMOs, and they achieve 90%, right? So that's about a 30-ish% improvement in performance, right? And the difference between the best and the rest is that the best do project management, sure, but they also focus on all of that portfolio level decision making and the governance layer.
I think Ash and I are going to become the best friends, because you can, if you're watching this in the chat, Ash, you're a legend. Governing body often responding late, ignoring PM's options to fix and move forward. So this is like, when I was thinking about this topic today, it really, yes, we can put, you're right, Ash, we can put frameworks in place, we can put processes in place, but we've still got to work as project managers, and I don't think we talk about it enough, our soft management skills, because we're still working with humans, and they have innate drivers, things like greed, power, influence, and these things are aspects that you can't mechanize, you can't process your way out of. You have to start thinking about the politics, thinking about how someone works, how someone responds, what their personal drivers are. So you're on the money, Ash. I actually agree with you there. That is a difficult part of our job, but it's our job. I often flippantly say, use muffins. Food's at the heart of every meeting, and it's amazing how quickly you can get them there. I have at times almost locked people in a meeting until we get a decision to leave, and had to be quite brutal in regard to being able to move forward within timeframes. Has anyone, I can put it out, I'm taking over to your role too, Stuart. Have either of you had any experiences where you're actually working with the people within that framework? How do you get the rogue leader to turn up, make the decision that you require them to make?
Yeah, so sometimes I find though that there's rogue leaders and rogue leaders. Like, there's always bad eggs around which make life difficult for everyone. Sometimes I think in governance structures, people just don't understand what is expected of them. The organization's not clear about the accountabilities or their responsibilities in respect of a project. So like, sometimes you'll get project sponsors and they don't really understand that they're supposed to be there with the hand on the tiller for the entire project from start to finish. They simply don't get that. And
good call out.
And I think there's another side. Sorry, Amanda. I think there's another side to this as well, right? Because there's the motivation, right? So if you, I'm going to use a really horrible metaphor, right? But if you whip a dog often enough, right, that dog's going to shy away from you all the time.
Yeah.
And the problem is that historically, the executive's experience of project delivery is appalling, right? That dog's been whipped again and again and again. And I forget exactly where it was. I'll try and dig it out after the session at some point and share it with everyone. But I saw a report recently, and it was something like 70% of execs. This was specifically about IT projects, assumed that the project was doomed before it even began, right? So why are they going to turn up if the project's doomed? Why are they going to turn up to your meeting? So I think there's something there about it's not just knowledge and awareness. I think there's just a trust issue.
There's an issue around accountability too, and organizations quite often, especially if they're not delivering projects on, constantly on time and on budget and so forth, they often take a very negative view of accountability, and that view is blame. Making somebody accountable is knowing who to blame if and when it goes wrong. And that's a completely wrong approach to accountability, because the concept of accountability is about empowering somebody. So if you make somebody accountable, what it means in the organization is that everybody knows who's accountable for the project, and therefore when that person starts making decisions, they're expecting it. They're expecting them to go forward and make decisions. They're expecting them to shake things up. But too often you get organizations that don't have a mature view of accountability, and so you end up with this terrible blame game, and it comes back to what you're saying, Amanda, which is that they're just whipped.
Yeah, and I've just put it in that. So I often, for recovery, I often walk in and articulate very clearly, we have a no blame culture in any recovery process. I want I want someone to feel empowered to come up and say, we have a problem. and setting that tone at the very top, which does come back to your leadership pre-governance. I'm trying to make sure we articulate that. Setting that tone at the top, that everyone feels safe to come up and say when things are wrong. That red is great. We want red. And that was a really difficult thing in one of the last projects. They shied away from, actually, I'm not sure if there's anyone on this call who's heard this story before, and I apologize, but we were running a telco CRM upgrade because we were actually, it was for the white and yellow pages back in the day for Australia. And because of the print cycles, we only had a 2-week window to go live in the year. So any delay outside that window would put us back a year. Now, we found out that for some reason, through the reporting system, we were seeing green. Things are going great. Testing was fine. It's on track. But if you went down and actually spoke to the guys, like the test lead was out the front having a smoke about 30 times a day, like stressed beyond outside, when smoking was fashionable. Outside looked like a drowned rat. Just he said, our defects are high, we're not getting the pass through. And I'm saying, well, hold it, there's a disconnect. What's going on? It actually came down to a romantic affair between one of the test leads and the person doing the reporting, who changed it to green because she didn't want the romance person the boyfriend, shall we say, to be rolled off the program. So thought that was the way by which to not show red, because red was deemed as bad. And we had to very quickly unpack that and lean into testing to get those defects passed through before. We made it, but it's very interesting, the perception. Red is not bad. And the way we use our governance structure to approach those problems is really important. So like trying to articulate, that's why I'm saying when it comes to governance, it's not a one size fits all. We can't roll out a framework for everybody across project management globally that says, this is what will work for you. It has to be an artisan approach, and you have to call in on people across our community, our PM community, to help develop a lot of the time, to look at what works and what doesn't. Thanks, Alberto. I'm going to say hi. I'm just watching the chat there. And it depends on what type of project you've got going as well. So very important to look at it, at governance, more from that artisan approach than just a solid.
And so I want to pick up on that idea that it's not one size fits all, and try and tie it back to, I'm not quite sure we're quite bottomed out what it is, right? So Ross, I want to come across to you, because up above your right shoulder on my left is the other shot. There you go, up there is the book, right? This is the textbook for the certification, right? Exactly, you and Adrian put together. And in there, so I have a reputation for being the guy that reads the executive summary of a book and thinks I've read the whole book. But I've actually read the book. And
there was no executive summary, Stuart. So.
Yeah, I know. You see, you tricked me. You tricked me. I kept reading, going, is this the end of the exec summary yet? So one of the things that you did in the book that I really liked was that you don't kind of say, this is how you do it. You say, here are some principles. So talk us through what some of those principles are, and maybe that will help us understand kind of what governance is or what it could be.
Yeah, sure. In terms of the principles, I should point out that both myself and my co-author, Adrian Morey, we come from a consultancy background. So when you come from a consultancy background, and it sounds very much like your background as well, Amanda, when you walk into a client, you can't go in spouting the philosophy of governance. You have to go in and say, these are the changes you need to make, and this is why. You have to be able to support it. And so when we wrote the book, we knew it had to be practical, but we weren't capable of writing anything but a practical book anyway, because that's the type of business we were in. But we also knew it couldn't be prescriptive. And the way to not be prescriptive is to have it principles based. And so we headed down the principles route, but we wanted the principles to be sufficiently specific, if you like, so that people could use them to build their own governance frameworks. So having said that, so I'll just give you a flavor of some of the principles. We start with really basic things like treat change differently from business as usual. So when you've got governance arrangements, the reason you have a project board is that everybody knows that while the org chart can do all sorts of good things, you know, it's the way businesses organize themselves for business as usual. It's no good when it comes to a project because it hits people. A project impacts people across the organization. So consequently, you have to bring them together in a board. And yet you'll still see everyone, I'm sure the people out there are thinking, yeah, we all know this. But you have no idea the number of times I've seen the project board then, which is supposed to be the decision-making body. A decision is made and you say, right, that's great, the decision's made. And the project sponsor says to you, now I've just got to get it ratified by my boss. It's got to go up to the boss. So all decisions go to the boss. No, not all decisions. The financial decisions have to go to the CFO. So what they've done is they've taken a project board and slotted it back into the org chart, the very thing they're trying to avoid. So that's one principle. Single point of accountability for projects and programs. One person accountable. And then the third principle is how do you choose who that person should be? And that's about focusing on the business. Treat your projects and programs as investments, and therefore they're investments in the business. The business has to be the people who own the projects and programs, supported, of course, by the delivery people. You mentioned earlier, Stuart, about when you come up against people who act badly in the governance space. And there's a classic situation that I've bumped into many, many times, which is that when you talk about governance, you automatically start talking about accountability. And when you talk about accountability, you're talking about ownership. And when you talk about ownership, you're talking about turf protection. And so when you come in and the delivery group in the organization is owning businesses, owning projects and programs, when they should be the delivery agent, you know, the supplier representative, and you're trying to explain to them, no, the business should own it and you support the business, you're enabling the business, you can end up in all sorts of turf protection issues. And that's one of the major reasons you get pushback when you try and put new governance arrangements in place.
Amanda, do you have any thoughts on that? Because that's something you and I have talked about before, right?
That's what I was talking about, but we still work with people. They've still got politics. We've still got the thought of power or influence still plays at the table, and that is something we can't avoid, but we very rarely talk about how to manage that. And I've just was about to ping, but I can say it out loud. The other thing I haven't seen in a long time when I walk into projects is the old terms of reference that we used to come out with, a solid term of reference for each governance forum that articulates the clear accountabilities. I'm going to be a bit flippant and say that seems to have passed away when we started to lean in more to our agile desires of and agile in the messed up version, which is more flexible, not really pure agile. So that seems that they want to do away with some of these structures, which we have to lean on, because ultimately when it comes down to it, if someone isn't performing against their role, well, then you've got to escalate, because it's in the best interest of the project delivery, and everyone always has a boss, but you do have to escalate that role. And I do find a lot of the time, whether it's PMO leaders, even program directors, they do find it difficult to navigate how to escalate a steering committee role, and how that influences that. It will influence my career. No, poor delivery will influence your career. Keep the eye on the prize, not personalities, and in the best interest of how you deliver some of those hard decisions, we have to do as project management professionals, I think.
Yeah, and it's always about people at the end of the day, right? So you got to have clarity, but you got to have people taking part in that. And again, coming back to this trust issue, if oddly enough, Ross, you were talking about the turf battles where the business is kind of feeling a little bit like the delivery team's trying to take over. Sometimes we see it the other way around as well, where if the delivery team doesn't have a good track record, where the executive is keeping the distance because they don't want to be associated with a project that they think is going to die, right, and is going to tank. So which becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah,
right? It's mad,
right?
I mean, it's a completely mad point of view, but they're human, right? And it's quite a natural thing to try and distance yourself from something that you think is doomed. You don't want to be part of that. So how do you recommend people approach getting buy-in to putting good governance in place? Ash was sort of floating an idea earlier in the chat where he was saying, just go in and tell them that if every minute you delay this decision, it's costing you 40 grand or something, right? So how would you guys recommend approaching that discussion, both at the and it's sort of at two levels. One level is sort of at the individual project and project sponsor kind of level, and then the other is sort of at the organizational level. How do we get it sorted out across the organization?
Change the culture.
Magic.
It's
I knew you were a fairy with a magic wand. So how do you do that with your magic wand then, Amanda?
Okay, I can tell you, lollies and food. Like
muffins,
lollies and food. It is in the heart of it, as much as we like to pretend we're grown-ups, at the very heart of who we are big kids. I think everyone stops growing up in their brain at about 20. I can tell you, I rang my side story. I rang my grandmother, who turns 100 this year. This is a couple of years ago. And I just said to her, how old are you in your head? And she said, 23. I said, yeah, so am I. So we all stop our brains at about 20 something. I'm sure this will resonate with most people. Everyone else around you also stops at about 20 something. And at the heart of it, and this, leaning back on I'm thinking of a recent energy company we just did a SAP program recovery for. You turned up and everyone was bitey. Everyone, it's like the brothers and sisters were snapping at each other. It was highly stressful. They'd been in design for well over 12 months, couldn't get out of it. And so I came in with bowl. I've never bought so many lollies from Kmart in my life. Like I would fly from Melbourne to Sydney with half my bag full of those Juby Snake lollies. And what it does is it brings everybody around a table and people start to talk and communicate. I particularly like you can leave them at your desk because you start to get a buzz and you start to hear what's going wrong, what's going right, who's struggling, where the stream. We had 3 streams of a SAP implementation over 3 products. Which stream's struggling, where the touch points are. And I know I'm being flippant, bring food. It changes the dynamic in meetings, in terse meetings. Really feed the bear. It tones them down. Then you can start to actually bring out the little tricks. Guys, this is, we're going to lean in. Red is not bad. We no longer have a blame culture. We walk into these meetings, but be prepared to back people up. So if someone starts getting really passionate, you can tone them down. You start becoming the mediator, but also in a way that it allows them to have their frustration, because it's usually a bed of hot, passionate frustration that you're walking into. But my first trick is bring food. Phenomenal what it does to the dynamic of the team. And that, Candy's awesome. And then I actually had at one point a ugly mug competition, and because everyone knows me, I've usually got a cup of coffee what we started, little games like that. I had the ugly mug of the week coming into governance forums, and people would turn up. We went shopping at I don't know if this relates, so St. Vinny's shops, like seconds shops, to find the ugliest mug jug looking thing. But people would come to the governance meetings to compete about who had the ugliest mug. And I didn't mind what got them in there. I don't care which game I used to get them in there. The minute they turn up, I've got them in there, right? And it does change. So I use games. I use, I'm not allowed to, I got told off by HR about bringing Nerf guns in, just from, someone will take an eye out. But at one point we had Nerf guns in the office. Anything that you can gamify will change the dynamic of the culture, which will feed into getting them in those governance forums and getting them talking. And from there, that's where you start setting up those guardrails Ross was talking about. So there is a serious side, but don't be hesitant to use play. We are still all human. We just want to have fun. To quote,
yeah. I always, when I lived in the States, I would always, every time I came back to the UK, I would just bring literally suitcases full of Cadbury's chocolate back to the States with me. And I would just do the exact same thing with Cadbury's chocolate. I'd walk into the developer's zone and just literally start throwing bars of chocolate around. And next thing, everybody's heads up, Easton's back, right? And then you've got their attention and you can have good conversations. So Ross, there's a question here actually, which is perfectly timed actually, Malcolm. Thank you for that. Because it feels like we've been talking a lot about project governance and how to get project leaders and that project culture all turned around. So what's the difference between that and portfolio governance and program governance, and what's the relationship between them?
Well, I love the fact that you give me the easy ones, Stuart. Really,
yeah. Well, I'm giving you a chance to shine, Ross.
Okay, well, look, it's presumably, we're understanding what the difference is between a project and a program. Yeah, are we? Or is that something that is still up for grabs? Like the concept is with a program is that it's sufficiently large and complex that it has a number of constituent parts which are best run as projects, and it's only by the coordinated delivery of those projects together that you're going to get the benefits and outcomes that the overall program is seeking. So that's the relationship between program and projects. And of course, you need governance at the project level if the projects are sufficiently large. But in any respect, if it's a project, it certainly needs an owner, a project sponsor. So you need governance at that level. And then you need to have integrated governance between your project level and your program level. And by that, I mean, everybody knows what decisions are made at the program level compared to what's made at the project level. There's a very easy way of working that out. And then you've got the portfolio, and the portfolio is the sum. It's in the management of portfolios book, isn't it? It's the sum of all the organization's investments in change, meaning all its projects and programs. The thing I like about management of portfolios is it uses the word investments. And that's one of the key things. And you alluded to this earlier, Amanda, when you said, that conflation between project governance and project management, and there isn't. There shouldn't be a conflation there, because what you're talking about is project management manages your project. Project governance manages your investment. You're making an investment in your business, and what you're seeking is for that investment to deliver outcomes and benefits for the organization. That's a very different perspective that you take. And it also is a very different perspective, therefore, that you take on the decisions that the governance bodies make. I often see the situation where you ask for the governance framework for either an organization or a complex program. And there's committees everywhere, which is fine, because in some cases, you know, in complex like tertiary hospital developments, for instance, I've never seen so many committees in my life, but they're probably all necessary. But it's the decision-making that gets confused, because the decision-making should be very simple. The decision-making should be straight line, informed by all these other committees. Because if you have too many routes for decision-making, you're going to end up in a world full of hurt. And I've gone way off track.
Well, no. So let me just dive in then. So yeah, we're talking about, so the common theme here right the way through is, and hopefully this isn't a big surprise to everyone, is that it's actually all about decision making, right? And having timely decisions, and knowing when you're bumping up against the guardrails and trying to avoid hopping over the guardrails, right? That's what we're kind of trying to do. So are those decisions the same at the project level, program level, portfolio level? So yeah, what are your thoughts in terms of what are the appropriate kinds of decisions people should be making in those three different forums?
Okay. If you think about a typical organization that's got a reasonably sized capital portfolio, you'd have a portfolio committee sitting at the top. In a perfect world, portfolio committee at the top. You'd have various program boards underneath it, maybe some projects underneath it. And then below that, you've got projects comprising the programs, yeah? And the question you've just asked is, who makes what decisions? How do you determine who's making what decisions? Which is hugely important, isn't it? Because if you don't know what the answer is, you're either going to end up with gaps or overlaps. If you get overlaps, the people at the bottom, I'll tell you, this happens, the people at the bottom won't make decisions. They keep escalating them because they know the people upstairs will make them. And if you've got gaps, then, you know, you've got things that should be decided on but aren't. And the situation's fairly basic, really. If you look at the project level first, consider that you've got a business case for that particular project. Now, the project sponsor owns the project. They also, therefore, have to own the business case because the business case describes the project. So what decisions do they make? They make any decision that can have a material impact on that business case. In other words, on the project. That's the decisions made by the project sponsor and project board. Now, what that means for the project manager is that they sit beneath that. They make any decisions that don't have a material impact on the business case. So if it's not changing things like the outcomes, the benefits, the budget, the core assumptions, the interdependencies, and so forth, if it's not making those impacts on the business case, then it's the project manager can just get on with their work. If it does change the shape of that project, change the shape of that business case, then it needs to be decided by the project sponsor.
And then presumably at the program level, you have the analogous situation. So if it's, if it has an impact on the overall program, you would bump it up.
Yes.
And then the same thing at the portfolio level. But at the portfolio level, there's kind of an extra layer of decision making there as well, I think, because that's where you're also deciding what you invest in, right? Exactly. Sorry, go ahead, Amanda.
So I was going to say, it's not even if, for me, at the portfolio level, you're about return on investment from a business strategy. The portfolio has a completely different function from what programs are here for delivery. Portfolios are here for return on investment for the business. If you're not answering return on investment, from the portfolio decision making falls the programs and the timing in which those programs have to be effected. So it's distinctly different jobs in my brain. Like a portfolio management it's not about delivery. It's about commercial decisions, your commercial impact to the business when you're looking over the horizons of where you need to go, when you need to do it, whether something's regulatory, what is the prioritization? You just have to do it because it's regulatory, or do we do it because the business is about to fall apart without that particular change? The other thing I find people forget is a project should be and I say this is going to come out like a very bad analogy, but like a virus. It connects to a business entity. It makes a fundamental change and then falls away. We don't run. I think people confuse projects and operations as well. You don't just run a project as an operation. That's often just a small program of it's not operational running is people who run that as, I call them initiatives, when I walk in and start to break open what people have in their program portfolio, because you see a lot of initiatives, not a lot of, and they're called programs, and we mix up the governance because we haven't been clear about what an initiative is, what a project is, what a program is, and what a portfolio is. Without that clarity, you will drive the business to the ground, and you'll start seeing a lot of cost overrun because it's not managed well. So in my head, they're very, very clear, and I guess we've got another webinar to unpack exactly what that is for some people. But portfolio is about your return on investment.
And I would add to that there's sort of, I don't know whether you put it in the portfolio or at the more into the execution level, but there's something that connects the prioritization and selection with the scheduling, right? Because if you end up and the resource availability, because if you end up saying, yeah, these are the top 30 projects, but you've actually only got space for 20, then you've killed your project execution before you even begin. Right, so it's not just about the ROI. It's also about deliverability and right sizing everything and making sure that there's communication between execution and that strategic level, right? So that what the stuff you're selecting is actually deliverable, if that makes sense.
But I like what Amanda said before, though, the fact that the portfolio committee needs to focus on return on investment and not execution. And I'd go further and say, as soon as you see a portfolio committee dealing with execution matters at the program or project level, it's a red flag. It's an immediately red flag, because what they're doing is they're not doing their proper job. They're diving down into the detail, and that's not what they're there for. It's a very different role.
It's the strength of that portfolio manager to cut that conversation. So that's outside of scope for you, because what we have a tendency to do is let people like continue to dive down and go into that rabbit warren. And we forget project manager is still and portfolio manager is still the manager of those outcomes. So to be able to have that strength and dig in and push back on the committees to say, okay, that's out of the scope. That's not your job.
The other thing you find, that's one issue. The other thing you find, particularly in organisations that don't have a mature project and program delivery arrangement, they're quite often in soft areas like health and social services and so on.
Health is fun. One of my babies.
Health is fun, yes. But one of the things you find at the portfolio level is they still haven't got it in their mind. Remember I said earlier about separating BAU and change. Suddenly they're talking about their BAU activities, and you're saying you've got to focus on change and just keep one eye on the BAU because the change will impact it. But don't start talking about the BAU for its own sake. And they can't pull themselves out of that mindset.
And I was going to say, it comes back to health. Health is a fun place for me, purely because it's the only industry I've found that's actually different. A lot of all the other industries, they make something, they have a commodity, they sell it. They have a commodity, they sell it, they make profit, comes around. Health actually works in a backwards way. And again, we'll unpack that one another day. But I find this is a cultural thing predominantly in the health industry, but it happens across other industries. Decision by committee. How many times have we heard?
Sure, I understand.
No, Siri doesn't understand that either. If you heard that, decision by committee is something I find is probably very prevalent in health industry, but I think we've stumbled across it a lot of times. Breaking that is actually, I find, even harder work. Lollies don't help in that instance.
No, that just
Lollies
encourages
don't help.
more people.
Yeah, so you've actually got to really manage your stakeholders closely. It's a heavy effort on the PM for engagement into those stakeholders, prepping people, getting them to understand that they may not be in that decision, even if they want to be, because everyone likes to have an opinion. So that's probably, in a governance context, one of the harder, sort of things to break, is that psyche of decision by committee, and sticking to hard, racy, hard terms of reference. And sorry, not your job. We love your input, but you're not going to be a decision maker, is often a difficult conversation that you just have to have. We're talking about a lot of difficult conversations.
So speaking of difficult conversations, there's a little bit of chat going on in the off to the side here about things like, when projects, stuff changes, the business case changes, the costs go up, the benefits go down sometimes, the business case changes, right? What happens in the governance stack, right, at these three levels? And let's keep it nice and simple at those three levels: project, program, and strategic portfolio, right? So the business case has suddenly changed. We've discovered that it's going to be 2-3 times more expensive than we thought. What happens?
Well, I've gone straight to scope. You're not going to get a fundamental change in a business case. Have there not been a fundamental change in something else? So when you're saying what happens,
I mean from a governance point of view. So let's not worry about why there's a change. Let's just, there's a little hypothetical situation where the business case, there's a material change in the business case. Who makes what decisions, and where does it get escalated to?
Okay, so my opinion there, let's say it's a program business case. Yeah, does that work for you? Let's say it's a program business case. And for whatever reason, there needs to be a fundamental change. So to start with, it doesn't come out of the blue, doesn't it? It doesn't just happen out of the blue. So there's all sorts of conversations going on that involve the SRO, because they're accountable for that program and they're accountable for that business case. So if there's a fundamental change, the first thing they need to do is advise the portfolio committee that there is a major issue here and they're working through it. And the next thing they need to do is work out, and the portfolio office, presumably, depending upon the nature of the issue, it's either we have to end the program or we have to do whatever. But you have to then go back to the business case and work out whether or not there is a viable outcome still achievable, given the money that has already been spent. You've burnt a certain amount of money. Can we get a viable outcome there? And then the portfolio committee has to come in, and if there's a need for further funds, that becomes a portfolio committee issue. So the SRO would go forward and say, we've redone the business case. We feel that for another 25% on top of what we've already spent, we're still going to get the outcomes and benefits we want, and we still think the business case stacks up. And then you go to the portfolio committee, and it's not a question of whether the business case stacks up. That's the SRO's job. It's a question of where the money comes from, because what they're going to do is pull money from other parts of the portfolio.
I was going to say, has anyone ever seen a program stop?
No.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say.
Never.
I was going to write, stopping a program or a project is still on the table, but I have never seen anyone. Executive tend optimism bias. I love it. I said I've not seen an executive ever stand by walking away from sunk cost. Yeah. It's a strong executive that will. And we've all been in programs and we've all been in projects that should have been closed. And they are still whipping the dead horse to get the thing over. They run over those decisions. I find it really interesting. I am yet to find anyone who's who stood there.
So
Yeah, they collected the project.
oddly enough, Amanda, as you know, our key focus is around project prioritization, so that strategic level. And so
Sorry,
we see it all the time, because when people go through our process and you get these things that just people look at them, they go, we shouldn't be doing that, should we? And they do, they kill them, right? But you've got to have a strong process, or as you say, or a very strong executive to make that decision, to drive that decision.
Yeah.
So a strong process can help you, because then it removes that blame culture. It changes that blame culture to being just data driven.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because stopping a program is seen by most executives as being career limiting.
Yeah,
we're sitting here, and if I ever saw an SRO who said this business case is no longer viable, we're pulling the pin, you'd think, promote him. This person knows what they're talking about.
So, Ross, you unwittingly just kicked off one of my little pet peeves. So if there are any CEOs on this call, or if any of you feel like sharing the recording with your CEO, please do. So one of the challenges in most organizations is that they actually often will set the goals of executives, right? And they will confuse goal with project. So a goal will be deliver this project.
Yeah.
That's not your goal. That's not your business goal. That's a project. That's a deliverable, right? So stop doing that, because as soon as you deliver that project into their goals and measurable and their bonuses, as soon as you do that, then they have no incentive at all to act rationally and to help you kill that project if it's a stinker.
Yeah.
Right.
It's true though.
So if you're a CEO, stop it. Stop it. I say it one more time. Stop it. Right. Because it's causing all kinds of problems. All right. Listen, I want to move. There's loads of conversations. There's loads of great questions about, how do you spot things going wrong? And we don't have time to answer them all. And I'm really sorry, folks. But here's one. Here's where I'd like to go. So we've got about 5-6 minutes left. Is, what would you do today to get the ball rolling? So let's assume you've got a fairly immature governance process. What would you do? And if you feel like sort of throwing in how you might be able to help people on that journey, that would be a good thing as well. So what would you do to get it started? And what could you do to help people get it started?
Governance.
Yeah.
Okay, before.
Oh, Ross, you start.
Okay, go on. If you're in a PMO, let's take the person in the PMO. It can be a hellish place to be sometimes, because quite often they don't have that strong link to the top executives to get things moving, and that can be very difficult. But if you're in a PMO and you're seeing projects failing and you're confident that governance is one of the issues, one of the fundamental things you have to do is prove that it's an issue. Now, one way of doing that, particularly if you've got poor governance, you tend not to get governance that's almost right, but not quite. To me, the organizations I've seen, it's not that they're at level 3 maturity or level 4 maturity. They're either at level 1 with governance, or they're at about level 4. The bit in the middle seems to be missed out. If you just map out all the committees that are involved in project decision-making, put it on an A3 page and start drawing lines between them. I did this for a council in Australia, a rather large council, and I mapped it. I just went through it and I did it. In every line, I said what it did and so forth. And then when I went to the executive management team, I gave them a copy of this and I said, now I'd like somebody to explain how this works, because this is your governance framework. And that was it. That was it. Nobody could explain it. And you say, okay, there's some changes we can make here. Let's start working through those changes. And if you've got good governance, when you start talking about the changes you've got in mind, it's almost impossible for anyone to disagree with them, because they're based on logic, they're based on evidence. So that's my tuppence worth.
I gotta add, like governance timing, it's a metronome. Now, one thing we get caught up in, and we all know this, so when projects start going off, offline or off kilter. They start veering into the dismal depths of not delivering. What people have a reaction to is they try and control. They try and lean in and they try and clamp down. And I bring the analogy to you of riding a racehorse to the finish line. If you pull in that rein really tight, you're going to slow down your horse. You're going to slow it right down and you're going to lose the race. What you have to do is actually the opposite. You have to let go of the reins a little bit and let the horse ride, and you ride the horse to the finish line. Different. You're not the horse. And that's what I think that we forget when we're in recovery. There is a human propensity to want to pull in and control and pull that rein right in. You've got to let it go. Now, what I say that is because you've always seen things where we've had every fortnight, we've had reporting. Now, the minute a project starts to go off the rails, someone comes up with a genius idea. I want to know more every week. I want to see weekly reporting. Yeah. God damn it. Yeah. That person should be exited from the building quicker than you can, because they're the problem. So what happens is that you wake up, and we've all done it, PMs everywhere, and you need Friday reports in. So on Monday, you start running around trying to get everybody lined up to get the information in, because by Wednesday, you need all the information in that's already predicting what's going to be on Friday, so that you can pull a meeting to the project information report pack in on Thursday, so you can at least give them a couple hours to read it before they have a Friday meeting to have a decision on the information that they are going to have from the following day. Because on the Friday, they have the meeting and they all thunk deep thoughts and make big fat decisions, only to know that on Monday, where no work has ever happened between Friday and Monday, apart from those of the poor test people or the developers who are actually doing work on the weekend, but there's been no fundamental movement from when we pick up our data. So you're boiling the frog. You're sitting there having such small incremental change, and you're making decisions based over something that happened in a 24-hour period between Friday and Monday. And so what you actually have to do is sit there and allow a week of people to actually do some project work so you can see the incremental changes. So when you're talking about your metronome or the heartbeat, because that's what governance is, when you're actually running those meetings, that metronome and heartbeat of how you are delivering. You can still do, say, weekly reporting if you really want to, but you do not run your committees and your project governance forums any smaller than that 2-week time frame. Otherwise, no one's got a goddamn time and day to do any work. So, and the decisions that you're making will not be based on anything that is effectively being done on the project, and the project will die. You will boil the frog. I am happy if anyone has a sponsor, a client to crawl in and just save that project by having that conversation. I wish I had a way to share with you all. I actually, much like Ross, I drew a view of your project forums, how they feed, because every single escalation path should feed into your next line up on your governance. Even your risk meetings. So you can actually start drawing every 2 weeks for your projects, which rolls into every 4 weeks, which comes into your quarterly cycles. So if you're doing monthly, after that, you do every 3 months on your quarterly cycles, and then every 6 months for some of those larger portfolio meetings to feed that reporting line in through that governance. But don't pull those reins in, and have that conversation with the executive and the leadership that explains to them the why.
Fantastic, thank you. So much as I think we could go for another couple of hours here, but I don't think that would go down well. There's plenty of conversation going on. So what I'd love to do is just give you very quickly, Amanda, if someone wants to learn more, wants to take this journey, they want to talk to you, they want to see how IBM might help, what do they do?
LinkedIn, as I desperately try and pull my LinkedIn. And I'm actually, Oakenfull's not a common name. I will connect with anyone. Please stay connected. I can reach LinkedIn's probably the best for everybody that I can think of. Generally, if anyone rings me, I probably don't answer my phone.
Brilliant. And Ross, where can people get a copy of the book, and where do they go if they're interested in actually taking the certification, the P3G certification?
The certification is the P3GQA is the company. P3G.
Oh, that's a sexy name. That is a sexy name.
Qualification Authority. Yep. And Alberto, you're on the line there. Why don't you drop in a link to it? And doing the course, you do a course, you can get accredited in P3G. It's all based on that book you can see there. You can get a book from P3GQA as well. You can get a book from the TSO, the stationary office. So yeah, it's easily available. Just Google it, you'll find it. But P3GQA, that's where you want to go, .com.
Thanks, Alberto. That's perfect.
Don't go anywhere yet, Stuart.
Yeah. Just drop your link into the chat, Amanda, and then people can pick that up.
I've just Alberto, you just popped it to hosts and panelists, so I'm just making sure that goes to everybody.
Perfect. And then it really just remains to thank both of you for your time and sharing your wisdom and expertise. It's always great. You can tell from the chat that people are crying out for this, right? So a great session. We should do this again. Again, my role in this is really just as a court jester, so that the real experts can shine. But if you are interested in the portfolio part of this, in particular, the prioritization and resource planning and all that kind of good stuff, we have another webinar in same time, same place in 2 weeks' time, where we're going to be demoing the product and maybe even previewing some really exciting AI capabilities that will make this whole strategic planning thing even better. Ooh, exciting. So keep your eyes open for that. You'll get invitations over the next couple of weeks, and I hope to see some of you there. Thank you, everybody, for joining. And I'm sorry we only did it for an hour, because it really looks like there's a huge appetite for this. And as I say, we'll try and get Ross and or Amanda back to carry on the conversation at some point in the future. So thank you, everybody.